Welcome back to another Mermaid Monday where we talk about everything mermaid. So today I am actually going to do a FINFOLK fabric tail review. This is going to be a little bit more in depth than just my unboxing. You've already seen me put it on. So if you follow me on the Instagram or Facebook, links are down below, then you have already seen kind of my viewpoints on this tail. Quick overview, it is a fantastic photography tail, terrible swim tail. And I'm going to tell you why. So we're going to start with kind of the bad and end on the good. So the bad part I don't like about it is the tail itself. It's just not a very good swimming tail. It is swimmable, but you do need to be a pretty experienced swimmer, preferably already practiced in a monofin and a fabric tail before. I personally had a first gen, so my experience is going to be a little bit different than the newer generations. One thing about mine that's different than the newer ones is it does not have any drain holes. So the fluke kind of fills with water because, you know, water will always get in the tail no matter what. A lot of times with silicone it just stays there. It doesn't really hurt or harm or make it too much worse. But with the fabric, it just kind of holds in the bottom. So getting out of the pool, you have like a giant bubbled up fluke that you can barely lift because it's full of water. And there's no way to really drain it out. In my Mertailor Basic, it is sewn on the side where it has the neoprene and the silicone, and the water would go right out of the seams. That does not happen with this one. The water stays in the tail. Because of that, there is a lot of drag with this tail. After talking with other mermaids who have a newer generation of a fabric FINFOLK, they experience similar problems even with the drain holes. Some people have added their own drain holes, and it makes it less bad, but it still bubbles up with water. It's kind of unavoidable for these kind of tails. Getting in the water as well is difficult because when you get in, it kind of just suctions to you. But the bottom part is like filled with air. So your like fluke is rising up because it has a bunch of air bubbles, and you have to really get those out, whether you like open it up. I like to press my fluke down and point my toes as much as possible to let all of the air out, and then it fills with water. So it's really difficult to just kind of maneuver in when it's especially like that. The fluke does float really badly. You can see that I am very clearly struggling a bit to keep myself down, which is not necessarily a bad thing. If you do need to float, it does help you float, but your feet are up in the air before your head is. The fluke doesn't even really go down. Like you have to fight to swim in it almost. Another bad thing about the tail that I think the company can improve on with their next lines is the seams itself are very weak and they do need to be reinforced. So if you can sew or you have a friend who can sew, I do suggest reinforcing all of the seams because they do kind of tear easily. I have a couple of places in my tail where just by putting it on, it was starting to unravel in certain areas and develop holes in the seams, because it's not reinforced and there's not a whole lot of stretch to them, being that it is scuba knit. It also stains really easy. This is not a fault of the company. This is more of just the fabric in general. Fabric does stain easy. So if you're in like, let's say the springs or a river and there's algae and you like brush up against a rock, you may have a stain there. You can get them out with a little bit of soap and water on a toothbrush or like a little sponge that you can scrub it with. That's what I've seen a lot of people do. So the upkeep for them is a little bit more than other tails that I've experienced. I haven't really had too many stains myself because I swim in the open ocean, and there's not a whole lot that will stain a tail there unless I brush up on a rock or something. I didn't have my tail with me when I went to the springs, but from other mermaids I saw in the springs, whenever they would brush up on rocks, they would have a little bit of stain and they would just wash it out in the bathroom after they were done. And it usually comes right out. Sometimes they don't, depending on how long it sits, how hard you like brushed up against the rock if you were like standing on it. Another thing that's not the company fault, but just the fabric tail in general, is they will tear and nag easy. So if you're like really rough on rocks, they will scrape and scratch, and it'll get little nits in the tail, especially around the heels. Standing in the tail, brushing up, it can snag on the fabric, causing it to kind of look weird, and eventually can develop holes in it. I've seen some people where they do have holes from just standing in their tails in like a rough pool. So I would suggest not to stand in your tail, like as minimal as possible. Just try not to stand in it at all. But if you do, just be extra careful with it, because they do tear a little easier than like a silicone would. I wouldn't recommend standing in a silicone either, because you can scrape the paint on that, but that's a whole other story for a whole another day. So that was kind of all of the bad things I didn't like about this FINFOLK fabric tail, and things that I think that they can improve upon. On a little side note, I will say that they do recommend what monofins you have. So when I first got my first fabric tail, it was the first ever one. It was the first release. I got it. It was a red one, because that was kind of my color back in those days. If you have been around since the early days of my YouTube, you would know that I had a red tail with black hair, and that's kind of what my style was. So I got a red tail. I was really excited about it, but it was, again, the first generation, so there was no drain holes or anything. They looked weird whenever they were wet, like after you get out of the water. You can see in some of my photos, I'll share them somewhere here, of just kind of like it just didn't look very good. It really didn't. People didn't even believe that I had the real tail. They thought that I had like a knockoff FINFOLK tail from China, and no, it was the actual tail. I also couldn't swim with it because I used the wrong monofin, but FINFOLK did not release what kind of monofins they recommend using until after I had already sold off my tail, because I hated it. So because I used the wrong kind of monofin, and I mean, they were just really pretty for photos. I didn't even get a chance to take a photo with it. I just was not happy with my first one at all. So I sold it immediately. So I thought I'd give them a second chance. It's been like I think a couple years now, a year or two, since they first started releasing them. So I thought I'd try it again, and so I bought a purple one. It was used, so I already know the damage that I had before. It's hardly anything. A couple of the seams were coming loose, and there was like maybe one stain, but it was pretty well taken care of and barely used. So whenever I tell you things that happened with me, is from after I received it, not before I got it. So I thought I'd give them a second chance and use an actual monofin that they recommended, and it swam a lot better than the first time. So do use the monofins that they recommend, and do not use the monofins that they do not recommend. This is like the Finis Luna, the Mahina monofin can actually tear the seams depending on what fluke you have. They don't recommend them for any of them, but there's, I think, one fluke shape that you can use it, but it's just really tight. So I would really be careful with the Mahina, and just research what monofin would be best for you in this tail. They also have like little vinyl inserts that keep its fluke shape, and I think that's a really good idea, although swimming with it was a little uncomfortable as the vinyl kept like rubbing against my heels and the tops of my feet. So it was a little uncomfortable, but it did make it pretty. Beauty is pain. So going back to the reviewing part of it, I'll go over everything that I do like about it. It's very affordable comparatively to silicone tails. So if you want to get the look of a big old silicone tail, but you can't afford it, these are a great option for you. They do look beautiful. That is undeniable. You know, no matter how you feel on FINFOLK as a company, no matter what you think about their tails or anything like that, like, you have to admit they are really pretty tails. So I got mine. I did a couple photo shoots. It's a lot easier to transport than a silicone tail. I took mine into the baths and the BVIs. This is actually, the place is a series, like, you have to go through like tunnels and caves almost. It's not a terrible trek, but it is a bit of a hike. just to get there because they are like natural forming granite rocks that set up on each other. So you have to sometimes go into tight places. And I honestly can't imagine carrying my silicone tail through all of that, trying to put it on in there, and then taking all the photos that we did. So thank goodness I had that fabric tail, or else I wouldn't have been able to take a tail in there. So for transportation purposes and like travel, it's a lot easier too, although it is a little bit more difficult to travel with than other fabric tail lines because of the vinyl inserts. If these vinyls fold, they will have a crease. So you have to be really careful about that. So at least they are light to carry, so you can go to a tough place to get to and get gorgeous photos of them. They look really, really nice on camera. I would say they look even better on camera than they do in person, especially when they're like wet and slick looking. It's really weird looking whenever they're wet and on land, but they do photograph very pretty. Another good thing that I do like about it, I had a problem with somebody recently copying my exact look using the same aspects of my Mersona as me, so I wanted to really separate myself from them. I'm not going to change my hair or anything because this is me and I really like the way that I look, so I'm not going to change a whole lot of my personal self, but I did get rid of that tail. When I say I got rid of it, I did not sell it. It is currently in Florida with my company doing birthday parties, and after doing a party in that tail comparatively to a silicone one, it was a lot easier to do. It looks prettier. The clients really prefer the FINFOLK fabric over the silicone looking one. And it was easier to transport, easier to carry the mermaids around, depending on the age group and depending on the kids and the client. It was just an easier tail to perform in. I've always kind of been against using fabric tails for birthday parties because I want it to be super professional looking, but since these tails look a lot like silicone tails, it really blurs that line of what you can use for a birthday party. A good rule of thumb to have is to not show up to a client's house in a tail that their kid might have. This is like the FinFun and like Sun tails, or the ones off of eBay and Amazon. I really would not recommend showing up in those to perform, because even though it's more about the performance than it is the tail, it's harder whenever you have that kind of tail and it's not as like professional. I would say the FINFOLK fabric tails are very professional looking. They're beautiful, magnificent. If you're a good performer, you can pull it off, because it is not always about the tail. There's plenty of fabric tails and there's a place in the community for them. So I would even say birthday parties are really good to have a FINFOLK fabric tail. Plus, you know, with kid parties are pretty rough on tails. So the upkeep for them comparatively to the silicone at a birthday party, so much easier, very replaceable. It's a lot more cost efficient to use. And that's what we are kind of transitioning into for the company aspect of it. So, I mean, I don't really have a good rating system of like numbers or anything, because there's aspects that I like and there's aspects that I don't like. A good review is, I would give a like 10 out of 10 for photography, like a 2 out of 10 for swimming. That's just my personal rating. I'm really bad at rating things, so. This has been my FINFOLK fabric tail review. They are coming out with a new summer line here soon, so that's exciting. Are you going to get one? And if so, which one are you gonna get? Don't forget to give a follow to all of my links down below. I will link the FINFOLK website as well. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you will never miss an upload. Hoping everybody has a wonderful Mermaid Monday, and I will see you in the next video. Mermaid kisses and starfish wishes.